All right, Shalom. First and foremost, before I begin this lesson, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, Bahashem, Merchak, Kodash. The modest go out to the apostles, Elsgar, and Millstone, who rule and teach well. Shalom, Barakim to you, brothers and sisters out there. All right, this is Brother Malachi from the Great Millstone Nashville camp, and Lord willing that this lesson is edifying to the hopeful elect. Right, I got the definition. Well, the biblical. So like the biblical definition of straight, because when you look up straight, typically, it could be like it says right there, a narrow pathway. Like the Strait of Hormuz. Something you probably heard in the news, quite a bit over the past few months. But like when you go to Matthew the 7th chapter, the definition of straight in the Bible means narrow, restricted, tightly squeezed, or in a state of severe distress and difficulty. All right, so especially that last part, right? It says a state of severe distress or difficulty, and that's the gate, straight gate, which I'm going to get that. But before I get that, I actually got something else I want to get. Well, actually, hold on. I'm just going to go ahead and read this now since I'm already here. Now, this would be in red. I don't think. Oh, here we go. Red letter. And that didn't do anything. All right, well, that didn't do anything, but it would be in red. Anyways, Matthew chapter 7, verse 13 to 14. It says, enter ye in at the straight gate, like we just went into, which this represents the truth. Right, this is that secret place spoken about in Psalm 91. But with walking the straight gate, you will have trials, you will have difficulties, you will have low points. You will suffer. Right now, just being an Israelite alone, you will suffer because you're still under the curse of Deuteronomy 28. This is not our rest, right? Micah 2 and 10. Right, but especially coming into this knowledge and you're essentially swimming against the river of the world, you're going to feel that current going against you. And you might have times where you get tired. You might have times where, you want to give up. But for what? What is that going to solve? Right? You're already here. Like it was one quote. I don't know who said it, but it was on one of the motivation videos, which I actually probably need to put another one of those on maybe tomorrow. I haven't watched one of those in a while. Which the motivation ain't always going to be there. But it's the discipline that needs to be there. Discipline is bigger than doing push-ups and eating eggs in the morning. Now there's a lot of different ways of discipline, but the ultimate discipline is seeking and serving Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai. Putting aside, your worldly desires and your lusts. Which there's always different lusts and things that we can put off. Speaking personally, first and foremost. And that's, it's things that we all personally got going on that we got to work on. And it is what it is. All right, but, every day you wake up that you're able to call upon Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai, that's another day and another chance to do better. All right, so it says, enter ye in at the straight gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat. Because straight is the gate and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. So and then that's another thing too. It said, few there be that find it. So we ought to be, very grateful that we have this ministry. Now, is there other things we want? Yeah, there's a lot of things Jake want. But are these things that you want, are they really necessary? There ain't nothing wrong with wanting more money or a different job, or maybe want a woman or another woman, or maybe you want this, you want that, But above all these things, what we should want and what we should be praying for is spiritual things. All right, now there's nothing wrong with asking the Lord for a new job or asking the Lord for, maybe your car, hey, my car has a lot of problems, praying. There's nothing wrong with asking the Lord to help you out and better your situation. As a matter of fact, the Lord expects us, and he already knows what we need. Okay. But at the end of the day, you might not have money. You might, obviously, none of us have the lives that we want in that aspect, right? Because that's going to come in the kingdom, right? Where we have families and wealth and new bodies, perfection. But you got to work with what you got. And ultimately, you pray for the daily bread. So, like King Solomon said, give me neither poverty nor riches. You don't need $10,000 in your bank. Now if you have that, then beautiful. You might not need 5 women. You might not need 2. Some brothers, they don't even have 1. And that's because that's what's fit for them. That's what's best for them to keep them on the right path. Some brothers don't need no nicer new car, sports car, whatever, Everybody is in their lot. Everybody has their things because the Lord is giving you, what keeps you on the right path. And the Lord will put you in uncomfortable situations and even self-afflicted. Because I will say my situation, there were some things that, I couldn't personally really do anything about. But there were still precautions. There were still different ways I could have handled it, so I would say it's where it's at because it's self-inflicted. The circumstances, I didn't take advantage of it. I didn't make the most of it. I didn't think these things out. There was no forethought. But self-inflicted or brought upon the Lord is still uncomfortable. It's still a situation where, the Lord, he didn't forsake you. And he wants you to grow from that and do better. Sometimes self-inflicted things, although they're not good in that aspect, we learn from them all the same. Right? Because the Lord is still allowing a certain situation to go down a path so you can learn something from it. And growing is definitely not a comfortable experience. And that's why people avoid the straight gate. That's one of the many reasons. They don't want to be uncomfortable, right? They don't want to forsake their lives. They don't want people to look at them weird. They don't want to, have to go out to camp and pray and get their fast and occasionally. And they don't want to have to do all these things. They just want to live comfortably all the time, continue to pursue after the lust of their flesh. Facts. Okay, they do. But if you want to get into the kingdom of heaven, which we know all Israel will receive the kingdom, everybody's going to be in the kingdom, because the kingdom will be here on earth, but we know only the Israelites will actually inherit it, because it is the kingdom of the Israelites. Like the apostles had asked, or I think Apostle Peter, or maybe it didn't mention, but it's like Acts 1:6-7 or something like that. I think it was Apostle Peter, but they asked Yahushua, and they said, "Are you going to now restore the kingdom to Israel?" All right, but everybody's going to be in the kingdom, but we know these other nations are going to be, they're going to be subject to us. All right, and Lord, when we're part of that elect, we're going to be that governing body, the first fruits of it. So if you want to get to the kingdom on the first go around, if you want to either be beamed up or even if you're a martyr, but you want to be a part of the winning squad. Not just the group, the group that gets there solely off of being an Israelite. You have to go through the straight gate, all right, which really all Israel is going to end up walking down a path of difficulty. Because even the 2/3 here in America that are going to perish, right, and the rebels across the globe, they're going to go through a lot of fucking shit once hell breaks loose and once things start really getting ramped up. We're really going, which we're going to go through more, of course. But we're going through stuff now to prepare us for that. John chapter 10, verse 1, it says, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that entereth not by the door into the sheepfold, but climbeth up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. So there's only one way in, right? You got to come proper, you got to come correct, and you got to go through the straight gate. That's just how it is, man. All right, let me get this. 2nd Ezra chapter 7, I'm going to start at verse 6. It says, there is also another thing. A city is builded and set upon a broad field, and is full of all good things. The entrance thereof is narrow, and is set in a dangerous place to fall, like as if there was a fire on the right hand, and on the left a deep water. And one only path between them both, even between the fire and the water, so small that there could but one man go there at once. If this city now were given unto a man for an inheritance, if he never passed the danger set before it, how shall he receive this inheritance? And I said, it is so, Lord. Then said he unto me, even so also is Israel's portion. Right, look at that. What did it say? How shall he receive this inheritance? You got to go through it. All right, all Israel ultimately will go through that, in different levels, different aspects. All right, but for the elect, they're like, hey, that's the only way. So we got to walk down that path. And there's a difference between walking willfully down the straight gate and the Lord forcing you to, which it's not, it's not the same, man. Because they're at that point, they're just going through straight judgment. We get chastised, and like I said, we have self-afflicted, moments of hell and stuff like that. And we receive certain judgments for the Lord, but it's not the same thing as these people, man. Because the Lord allows us to learn from all these situations and to be molded into better men and women as well. Right? Whereas these 2/3 are not going to be molded into better men and women. They're going to just simply be destroyed. But then we know they'll come back in the kingdom. Right? So, basically to sum it all up, you just got to go through it. But like the Lord told us, there's an expected end. This isn't going to last forever. All right, and the reward that we're fighting for is so much greater than this vanity now. No matter what situation, you might lose your job, you might lose your car, you might be broke, your woman might leave you, but all these things are going to happen regardless, right? When stuff starts to really ramp up, and a lot of these people out here, they're going to lose all those things, and it's not for the sake of the Lord. That's the difference. You're losing these things for the sake of the Lord. All right, so, which it's easier said than done. You can't say, oh, be happy, rejoice. You can, but I'm saying, like, it's easier said than done, but do your best to be happy and rejoice. Remind yourself of what you're here for. Remind yourself of what you're looking forward to, right? Because remember, this is temporary. This is all temporary, man. Especially because a thing that comes to my mind right now, let's say funds. You might have lost your job. You might have been, maybe you were sick or injured for a whole week or a few weeks, or maybe you had some random car things you had to pay for. There's a lot of things that can happen, and this is just one category, right? Dealing with finance. But at the end of the day, and that doesn't mean be negligent with your money, and that's something that I really need to work on. All right, don't be negligent with your money. Don't use these things to cope. Because like El Ariel said, we can't be coping. We got to overcome. Right? We got to grow past these things and grow up, get over it. Right? And which all these things take time. And for some it's longer than others, and we all have strong points and weaknesses, and it is what it is. All right? But at the end of the day, everybody's going to lose their money. Right? Because they're going to roll that chip out. There's going to be crisis and stuff that happen, and everybody's funds is going to be worthless or gone or out the door. Imagine you wake up in inflation. Gas is expensive as shit. Bread is expensive. Milk, just and you start losing jobs. Everybody's going to be broke eventually. All right, everybody's going to lose their carnal possessions eventually. So if you got to go through it sooner, which it might not even be a permanent thing, you might get a better job in 2 weeks. You might, who knows? Maybe you get a random a check from a family member or something. You never know what the hell could happen. All Remember too, the Lord said it's nothing for him to on the sudden make a poor man rich. So don't worry about these trivial things. We just gotta make sure we're working on ourselves. Putting Yahweh Bashemel Shai first, and everything will come through that. All right, so Lord willing, that this lesson was edifying. Before I close, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh Bashemel Shai, Bashem Rachai Kodash, the monarchs, the apostles, as great millstone. Shalom.